Have you felt it yet this season? It's a little bit come, whoever you are. For some, it's a sense of embrace. It's a sense of maybe coming with drums and bells and horns in full-on noisy celebration. Reminds me of a story. My husband has a sister who's 4 years younger than him, and she asked him if Santa was real when she was a first grader. And he knew, a different version of the Christmas story than she did. So he explained that Santa was the spirit of Christmas, like sharing and celebration and pulling who and what you love close. Well, little sister took this to mean that Santa is a ghost. Otherwise, how could he get around the world and through all those chimneys in one night? And you can imagine how she set her first grade class giggling at an opportune moment when she explained this to everyone. Whether the intended spirit of the season is peaceful or celebratory, connecting, kind and gentle, or something else to you, I would wager that how you are feeling about winter coming or the end of the year this holiday can be a pathway into something as ancient as huddling together with loved ones and waiting to see if the day starts to get longer and brighter. I love that Peter Mayer song. Am I the only one who knows it, or is it familiar to some of you? A few maybe know it, yeah. Because he names much of the challenge of seeking out the dark as the longest night approaches. Come in silence, come forlorn, come like a miner into the dark. Come, whoever you are, however you're feeling. Bring it all into the huddle. All those feels. Because you might just find that there is a brilliant, shining diamond in this soul of the longest night. This time of year is special and unique in creation because it is this time of standing still, of being fallow, creating spaciousness, because we can actually choose to finish, end, stop, and if we are lucky, connect with a sense of repose that can be very elusive in our fast-paced lives. Think of the way a bear's breathing and metabolism shut down during hibernation. How the visible parts of the annual plants die back. How the leaves that are gone from a deciduous tree allow us to perceive its shape and the function of that tree that is different than in the spring or the summer or the fall. If an aspen tree doesn't lose its colors in a blaze of glory in the fall, when would it have time to put energy into sending runners out and starting new groves? And just like all these kinds of intelligence that are subtly present in each of these life forms, we can take our cues from the season to pare back and release, to slow down, and maybe send out some runners. Or when we fail to take in those natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth, or life, death, and life, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, we lose some of the important wisdom that comes from ending, from letting go of all expectations, and just making peace with the reality of our limited lives. Even though some things continue, what better time is there to take stock and consider what can be finished, even if it isn't perfect? Boy, what a year for imperfection, right? What is it that I'm able to end because the life that I am able to give it is done? And sometimes we have to end completely and just wait before something new can germinate and send out shoots that can become those roots. I'm reminded of the Tao Te Ching. In number 11, it says, we shape the clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. Among other things, I take this to mean that we have to create a space in our lives before new patterns or new ways can begin to come in. Not only do we need to create space by letting go of things we know we have finished, sometimes just stop engaging in what is no longer productive. Or allow ourselves to be in this space of liminality, simply to create a little bit more space, even though we're not sure where the edges are. A few verses later in the Tao Te Ching, we're asked, do you have the patience to wait until the mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? This is not wisdom that comes easily and immediately to me, so I say it in front of you to remind myself. Maybe you don't have any trouble with it. And I know it's not just me. It came from somewhere. My mom called me the other day in a bit of a tizzy. Her UU book group was really looking forward to one of the very few in-person gatherings they've had in the last couple of years. They planned a potluck. And then one of the folks who doesn't come very often announced the night before, let's call her Sue, that she would be coming and bringing a new person. Sue often has a lot going on in her life. Sue is tall and loud and tends to focus any space that she's in on the events in her life. I'm sure you guys don't know anyone like that, right? My mom's known her for 50 years, but she doesn't look forward to seeing Sue. So she was anxiously wondering, what are the 5 or 6 regulars going to do in this situation? And I got to wondering too, this is a UU group, so what covenant do they have in place? What are the promises, the agreements, the expectations? Do they revisit the covenant every time they meet? Especially taking time to orient new folks to the practices that they cherish and they show up to enjoy together? Are they sharing time equally and letting each other know if they can't make it? Is that a regular practice? Is there a leader who helps remind folks of this sinew that binds them together to create more peace and joy and generosity of spirit? Now, I know when I get together with my family, I don't really name all the expectations I'm coming with, even though I've spent hours driving there because they're in New Mexico. And then, even though I haven't named what I'm coming for and spending all that effort, to get there for, I'm disappointed when those expectations aren't fulfilled. And so I, like many others, fill the holidays with busyness, and even though it feels hectic, I feel like I need to rush and, create all these things from every different angle to try to control these situations that are hard to name and talk about. But I know that the flavor of turkey is probably not the way to get there. And maybe you have noticed also that buying stuff and running around like crazy people disconnects us rather than creating the nourishment that those roots really need. The Tao Te Ching continues, "Why should the lord of the country flit about like a fool? If you let yourself be blown to and fro, you lose touch with your root. If you let restlessness move you, you lose touch with who you are." Perhaps you have those times of busyness, but with COVID life, it's hard to assume anything, right? I'm sure the last couple of years have had many experiences of being too still, like the sun this time of year. Too many of us have been stopped in our tracks by grief. We've lost loved ones. We've lost in-person experience of loved ones and little ones who've grown awfully fast in the last 2 years. People have lost jobs and familiar ways of doing important things, important simple things like buying groceries or visiting with neighbors and friends. And some of us are struggling with the effects of long COVID. Not to mention, in our wider world, we're deluged with widespread disinformation. There are attacks on democracy and women's rights, reproductive health, and the horrifying effects of climate change. There is this unquantifiable loss of life to the pandemic looming and not receding. It's a lot. And when that grief starts to sink in and stops us, just like the sun hanging in the sky this time of year, parching the ground and overheating everything, it's not a welcome pause. It can feel like your heart is being squeezed and stretched to the breaking point. If that is all too familiar a feeling to you, I wish for you to find some ease and some relief. Over the last several years, our family's been taking a different approach to the holidays. We try to let go of expectations and all the shoulds of the season. This year, I've let go of my Christmas tree being here on time. Ordered in October, but never mind. We just try to slow down. We don't expect everyone in the house to gather if that's not where their spirit is at. We don't feel like we have to be in some kind of lockstep orientation. And maybe the best thing about the moments we have together are sleeping in and lingering over a shared experience or taking a walk in the rain. When we couldn't spend Thanksgiving with my daughter because we were going to see my parents' brother and nephew in another state, she expressed missing those aspects of the holiday. Sort of the incidental family times when it's just peaceful and easy. This is how I know sometimes it's appropriate to let go of a dream completely. Sometimes it's appropriate just to prune it back like you would a rose bush that you want to bloom, but you don't want it to take over that corner of your garden completely. And you'll only know which, if you should let it go completely or just prune it back, if you take time just to be still and to make space for the vision of what you want to come. And this is also a time when you could take stock of some of those losses and just start by noticing, is this a simple loss or is this a complicated loss? A simple loss, a sometimes simple loss that can be so profound in the past, for me, is losing a pet. They are a source of love and amusement, the joy in life and just being that often presents a pure grief that can be in some ways a relief from the more complex grief I feel about the whole, pan idea of the pandemic of COVID. That's a very complicated loss. Really looking, if we're using this metaphor of a rose bush, at the canes and the thorns of our lives and deciding which ones might point to blossoms that we value, and doing our part to create space for those things like love, amusement, joy, and just being. It might be really naming a precious expectation when the topic of covenant comes up, or a loss you struggle with because it's so complex. It might just be saying ouch so that you and others can mend the cause or agree to cut out that cane. My daughter did a masterful job of pruning our rose bush one time. Now, my way would be to just cut the canes off at the base where they're going into the walkway. She, though, took the time to really look where the little tiny beginnings of new growth was showing itself, and to think about what direction that growth would take, and then look at the rest of the bush and decide what would give the most pleasing overall shape. And sometimes vision like that takes time and space. That creation doesn't happen all at once. It's like the art of creating a bonsai. It's not hurried. And this is a metaphor also for a group's communal vision, for efforts to grow from shared enthusiasm, hopes, and gifts. We need to let go of some of the patterns before. We need to let go of some of the patterns before we really know exactly what new ones will come into being. COVID has sure provided plenty of opportunities to let go, right? And this is also where faith comes in. We are people who believe that naming our promises can help us create more of what is beautiful, enjoyable, and agreeable in life. We have faith in creating and returning to these covenants. Naming and repeating these values actually changes our brains. Our brains, when we name and say and reflect these values in our feelings and we see them on other people's faces, it works with the plasticity in our brain to reinforce those pathways. I've found in the last 6 months that can be a wondrous thing. It can be shaped using fond memories, imagining future scenarios, and creating appreciation for more of what I want out of life. Sometimes it takes faith to create a space where something can take root and begin to flourish, even though we don't quite yet know what it will look like or how it will unfold and affect our lives. It takes faith and also discipline to keep inviting those gifts that we want, and kindness toward the patterns that no longer serve. Sometimes you just have to start, and start small. Starting small is still starting. Just like when a waterfall is all frozen and ceased to flow, and there's one drop that starts. Faith comes in when we allow something to go, even though we don't know what we want to replace it with. Faith comes in when it's okay for a cycle to finish, because new life can bring that beauty and transformation and love we want. Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, much of our knowledge of the life, death, nature is contaminated with our fear of death. Therefore, our ability to move with these cycles of life, death, and life are often quite frail because they can't get through that death part. The forces of life, death, life do not do something to us. They are not thieves who rob us of the things we cherish. This nature is not a hit-and-run driver who smashes what we value. Rather, seeing the archetypes of life and death as opposites, rather than seeing the having trouble with this sentence. Rather than seeing the archetypes of life and death as opposites, they must be held together as the left and right side of a single thought. It is true that within a single love relationship, there are many endings. Yet somehow, somewhere, in the delicate layers of the being that is created when two people love one another, there is both heart and breath. When one side of the heart empties, the other side of the heart fills. When one breath runs out, another begins. That's the end of Clarissa Pinkola Estes' quote. So, I invite you to ponder what patterns, what efforts that you spend your time, talent, and treasure on need some transformation. What might be needing to wind down now in this time of stillness and waiting? And with equal enthusiasm, as you release and wait, what gifts in life do you want to breathe in to the space that's created?
Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. The congregation depends entirely upon the generosity of its members and friends. All that we give in time, talent, and treasure is what sustains this community and makes it not just a sanctuary for us to return to for spiritual nourishment, but an oasis from which we can go out into the world carrying the waters of life. People at home can donate by going to our website at nvuu.org and clicking on the yellow donate button on the left-hand side, or send a check to NVUU at 1625 Salvador Avenue, Napa 94558. The offering will now be gratefully received.